Now, we don't have the time to go through every line of markup here, so let me just kind of hit the highlights, and I'll probably have time for a little bit of questions, so come up if you have a couple questions. But basically what I'm going to do when I make a style is I'm establishing values for properties. Okay, that's all a style really is. Values for properties, and they're going to be given a name, right? So I'm saying things like, well, the foreground color, the font size, the weight of a button. See that target type attribute? So I'm defining a style for buttons. Is going to be set to these values. Black, font size 14, that weight. So if I were to change that to, say, 84, see how my huge get info just changed over there, my designer? Now if I go back to my normal size, it shrunk back down again. Right? But now here's the really cool part that restyles the surface of the button. There is a property that all different widgets have called the template property. Now, a template is a complex thing, right? It's not, you can't represent the template as a simple string like black, 14, or bold. So XAML defines a different syntax to set the value of complex objects. Okay? So everything I just selected, that whole selected thing is the value of the template for the button. Again, please don't get hung up on all the details here, but you might see some things like, oh, okay, he's using something called a radial gradient brush. Okay, that looks radial to me, okay. He's going to go ahead and set up different colors for that brush. Okay, it makes some sense there. And then we're going to fill it all up with that brush, right? So I've totally restyled the basic gray button into a somewhat nauseating green circle, right? Kind of the pea green circle here. Now remember, this template is not actually connected to anybody yet. I've just defined a resource. So to actually hook it up, let's go down here. And where did that little button go? He was over here, right? So there's my little button. And look at what I'm able to do here. I'm able to define which template I'm working with. Now, if I get rid of this template, by the way, look what just happened. There's my gray rectangle again, right? And there's my cool button again. All with me on that? Okay. So that's the gist of what we did in that particular cell of the grid. Right? Now, let's talk about this little part down here. Now, I'm going to actually run this so you can see what that part does, because right now it's not obvious. Okay, so you see those little balls moving around there? Right? Just a real simple double animation where I'm changing the x and y values of these ellipses. Right? But again, the compelling thing is I'm not managing the threads. I'm not carving out a double buffer. I'm not erasing and redrawing anything. I'm just connecting double animation objects to these ellipses, and they move themselves. Right? So let's take a look at what makes that happen. Again, we're just kind of doing a high-level survey, but I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to talk about. So, I didn't mention this, but here's the grid itself. I turned on the lines so we can see that there's 4 cells here. Okay? So we're down over here. So we're inside of this cell, and look at what is inside of that cell. We're going to put a different container, a canvas. Right? Grids are awesome when you want to have some flavor of organization, right? Like the button always goes here, and that's it. Canvases are awesome for any kind of graphical data, right? Because canvases allow for absolute positioning. They don't try to wrap into a panel. They don't try to stack in a panel. If you just say, put a circle there at point 0, 0, it's going to be at point 0, 0, no matter how big the container is. Okay, that's the canvas. Well, in my canvas, I'm going to define a trigger. Now, you might remember earlier in this little lecture, I talked about triggers are kind of like a way to intercept events in markup. And look at what event I'm going to capture on the canvas. The loaded event, right? The loaded trigger. So what is that effectively saying? When the canvas loads into memory, do something. And what am I going to do? I'm going to begin a storyboard, right? I would say out of all the things in markup, authoring an animation in markup is a little weirder than just doing it directly in code, because they have this abstraction of a thing called a storyboard. You don't really see a storyboard if you're just writing the code for it. Okay, you just have to call a method, begin animation, right? So I always kind of pitch it to my classes. Think of the storyboard as a XAML equivalent of calling begin animation. Okay? Well, what do I do when the animation begins? Well, we are going to declare a bunch of these double animation objects. Right? You can probably guess what I'm doing. I'm going to be adjusting the XY position. So why a double animation? Well, the actual XY values are doubles, not integers. They're actually doubles. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and define these animation objects. And I can do things like say, who is the other thing I'm going to connect to? So see those guys there? E1, E2, E3, E4? Guess what they represent? Yeah, my 4 little circles. Right? And what am I going to be adjusting here? I'm going to be adjusting their top and bottom locations, or their top and left locations. I can specify how long to do this for, so just constantly bounce. Don't ever stop, right? How long it's going to take you to do that. Do you want to auto-reverse when you're done? I'm just declaring through markup how this little sequence will work, right? So these are the targets. And where are those targets? Well, they're still inside of this canvas. So the canvas defines the trigger that we just saw, but there are the actual ellipse controls. E1, E2, E3, E4. Okay? Now, I can't get too far down this path, but when you're using a particular part of the WPF technology stack called the shapes, okay, the geometric rendered images are just as functional for the most part as any other user input element, right? So if you generate an ellipse, it's going to have the same functionality as a button, meaning I can have events. Right? I can do hit testing. I can have a tooltip pop up. Right? I can go ahead and change the cursor of the mouse. So here, I'm actually able to do that kind of stuff. Right? So there's the ellipse. Here's the cursor. I made it kind of half transparent. Right? Pick a color. I can change that, of course. Right? Give it a height and a width. And then look at this compelling part too. Again, this is where I invite the Windows programmers to think back to what you would do if you were trying to do hit testing with GDI. Right? You would have to be splicing XY coordinates and mapping areas in memory to what this image is over here, and it would be pretty nasty, right? W param, L param. Well, here I just say handle left mouse button down event. Right? Now, let's take a look, though, at the code, because this is the first piece of code we're going to actually see. Right? So remember, when I run this web page, this is eventually going to be a web page, I got my little bouncing balls. See how the mouse cursor changes? If I click on one, see how it just changed over here? Right? Can't grab that guy too easy. Come here. There we go. Right? So I was actually intercepting click events. Was I doing a post back to the web server here? No. This is all happening in the mini CLR, right? In the mini, Silverlight runtime. And, this probably won't make anyone raise their eyebrows. It's just everyday C# code, but let's take a peek. So here I just kind of have a variable declared, so I know which thing I clicked on, right? But the real interesting part is happening in this event handler. Okay, so all the circles are coming to the same shared handler. So inside of this region, I'm just going to basically figure out, well, who sent it? Which guy is actually saying they were clicked on. And then based on E1, E2, E3, E4, I'll just set that little state variable. So imagine what we're trying to do, right? That might be a way for the user to say, look up this item in your database. So I click on circle 3. Now I know to go read the third row in the database table, right? But that's it.